How's it going, Rocket Arena fans? This is the analysis video for the second official Rocket Arena tournament that was played. This video is going to break down the play rates and the win rates of every character in the game based on who was played by the teams in this tournament. We will also compare the pick rates and win rates of each character with the same stats from the first tournament to see what changes in the meta there have been. This information was gathered and put together by myself, Bolt, and Naru, so special shout out and thank you to those guys for bringing me along and for putting in the effort to gather this data for people to see. Now, before we get into the analysis, I just want to share with you guys, there was 100 games played in this tournament. That means there were 200 total team compositions. Now, let's get to it with what I'm assuming most of the people are here to see, and that is the win rate and play rates of all the characters in this Rocket Arena tournament. You can see here, Kai has the highest win rate, and Jado is second, but keep in mind that he was only played on 2.5% of teams in this tournament. That's only 5 matches. Then you have Flux, Blastbeard, and Mistine rounding out your top 5. Although Flux was only played in 13.5% of teams, Blastbeard, the Chunky Pirate, was played in 60% of teams, and Mistine was picked on 34% of teams. One surprise here is Gant, the newest character in the game. He was picked in 40% of matches, and he had a 47.5% win rate. And as we move down the list, we see Izel, Leaf, and Amphora all had similar win rates. And then towards the bottom, we have Boone and Plink with the lowest win rates at 33.3%, as well as being played on 7.5 and 14.5% of the teams respectively. A different way to look at this information is in this graph. As you can see here, the x-axis is the play rate and the y-axis is the win rate. This graph more easily shows that Blastbeard was picked the most by far, with Kai, Mistine, and the newcomer Gant being next in line. Then things get a little closer with the majority of characters before you see Jado and Boone below the 10% pick rate line. And don't let the win rate fool you. Remember, Jado was only played on 5 teams total in this entire tournament. One final analytical tool used was a power level scale. This method was originally introduced by Naru back after the first tournament. I'll save you the math involved in calculating the power levels, but the data gathered using it fits into the information of the other graphs. According to this chart, you can see that Blastbeard and Kai are the best characters in the game. They've been a staple to the competitive teams for a while, and this tournament was no different. The newest character, Gant, made his presence felt as he is tied for third with Mistine. Then you can see what can be considered a situational character list in the middle of the pack before you get to the bottom where Plink, Jado, and Boone reside. Now, I want everyone to take a deep breath because we're about to get into what I like to consider the interesting part of this data set. Comparing this tournament to the last tournament, it's not as easy as it sounds. So before we get into the numbers, I just want to say at the front, between Tournament 1 and Tournament 2, there were 2 patches with balance changes. That means that the differences between the 2 tournaments can be contributed to the balance changes brought forth by these updates and not necessarily because of a meta shift due to new strategies and compositions. To start off, let's compare the characters' win rates between the first and second tournament. As a reminder, this list is in order of characters with the highest win rate in Crater Cup 2. So Kai had the highest win rate in the second tournament. That's why she's at the top. The minus 1.7 beside her name means that a character's win rate went down 1.7% from the first tournament to the second. Characters with a plus, like Jado, had a higher win rate in the second tournament as compared to the first. As we break down this list, we'll see that Kai still has the highest win rate. Jado jumped almost 20%, but we do have to remember he was only played on 5 teams total. It's interesting to note that all of the top characters from Tournament 1 had a decrease in win rate. That's a positive sign because it means that the characters as a whole are moving towards a mean 50% win rate. In other words, that means the characters are seemingly looking more balanced. Another way to visualize this is by looking at these two charts together. At this time, we are only concerned with the y-axis, or the up and down movements of the characters. The general representation of the mass of characters moves closer to the 50% line in the second tournament graph. For this, and for all intents and purposes, this means that the balances that came through in patch 3.0 and 3.1 have moved the game into a more balanced direction. Whether the changes implemented were good or bad, I'll let you decide that. This video is for analytics, not for forming opinions. The Flux nerf definitely impacted her win rate a lot. Also, the top characters seem to have taken a hit with their respective nerfs as well, being Kai, Blastbeard, and Mistine. And in the other direction, we see that Jado, Leaf, and Boone all saw growth in win rate. Now onto the pick rates. And I want to point out that these comparisons are to show what amount the characters were picked in the first and second tournament. This has nothing to do with wins and losses. This is at a base level just what characters were picked and what amount they were picked. Now this table looks a little different than the win rates table. The order of the characters is by what character was picked the most in the second tournament. The plus or minus beside the character indicates whether the character saw more play or less play as compared to the first tournament. And the last column shows the change in position for character pick from the first tournament to the second. For example, in the number 6 spot, we see that Leaf was picked 12.4% more in the second tournament and rose 5 spots in the list. I'd like to take the time to point out that Gant was introduced between the first and second tournaments, so he has no data to compare it to. This also means that some characters like Izel and Mistine may have moved down the list, when they may not have moved if Gant had not been introduced. Now with this table, we can see that Leaf, Plink, and Boone were the only characters to see an increase in both play rate and win rate. Now before we walk through comparing every character, I'll refer back to the same charts we used to compare the first and second tournament earlier. This time, we're looking at the left and right changes for these characters. And by putting these charts on top of one another, I think it's going to be a little easier to see these changes. We see that Kai, Blastbeard, and Mistine all had decreases in their play rate. Although Blastbeard is still being played more and is the only character to have above a 50% play rate. Now this part of the video is where people are going to start to disagree. They're going to start to have their own opinions, but we're going to address balancing characters here. These balance suggestions were put together by Bolt, Naru, and a few other community members, and I'll be sprinkling my own thoughts throughout because why not? It's my video. But I do want to say these proposed changes are based solely off of these tournament statistics, and those that worked on this section tried to keep it as objective as possible. I'm here to sprinkle in the subjectivity, so if you don't agree, that's fine. You're just not agreeing with me. So let me know in the comments below if you do or don't agree and what changes you would propose as far as balancing these characters. But without further ado, let's get into the balances that may make Rocket Arena more balanced. We ordered this list in the order of win rate. So first off, at the top of our win rate list was Kai. She was nerfed in her cooldowns prior to this second tournament. These nerfs put her in a better place in the overall meta, as she has good burst damage and impulse damage. These are the biggest parts of her kit, and the devs shouldn't touch it. Her bubble is the focus of these recent nerfs because it is the only ability in the game, besides arguably Black Hole Cat, that has a lasting effect on the map. The duration of the bubble was nerfed, and only time will tell if that is effective and enough of a nerf for her. Next up is Jado. And objectively, Jado is a good character. He has great damage potential and is great for new players learning the game. But to be honest, his kit is kind of boring. At least one other character in the game has a similar ability to each of his, and theirs is usually better. His mobility in his ult, or his movement ability, needs to be increased, or the cooldown should be reduced so he can get this more often. Next up is Flux. Flux was hit hardest in the most recent balance changes, and this was a hot topic for a while, but the stats say that she's in a decent spot. The nerfs to her mobility made her less fun and more targetable while she's trying to escape, and one proposed buff for this is to make the size of the Black Hole Cat larger on cast, but not raise the damage output. Next up is Blastbeard. BB himself calls some artifacts to be nerfed, and by association, these artifacts that he tended to use meant that he was nerfed. Right now, he seems relatively balanced. His kit is appealing because of its large burst damage potential and an amazing ult ability. He really is the only quote-unquote tank in the game, and that makes him a staple to a competitive team. And if Rocket Arena is okay with him being a staple to the competitive teams and meta, then they should leave him as he is. If they don't want to see him played as much and see him being played most in the game, they should probably just introduce a new tank character. Next up is Mistine. Mistine is still good. Her shield and hover nerfs were a move in the right direction, and her skill floor is seen as low since her ability to just float above the action and rain free shots offers the question of lowering the amount of time she can float after a jump. She's tough to balance because she's also fairly specialized where not many players reach her skill ceiling. Next is Gant. And with him being the newest character, we don't really want to start throwing out potential changes for him, but it is interesting to note that his tankiness is part of the reason that he was played so much in this recent tournament. Next is Izel. Izel is quite balanced, but her reload cooldown needs to be fixed. Her reload animation will often reset when trying to combo abilities. If Rocket Arena tweaks this to where it doesn't occur as often, then she should be fine. Leaf is an interesting case. He was played a surprising amount in this second tournament, and after watching the tournament and seeing the skill at hand, it seems that aim assist is the main cause of his prevalence. The recent change to aim assist in the game overall makes Leaf very good on controller with the, quote, normal aim assist setting. In the late games of the tournament, Leaf was a top contender for MVP due to the fact that he seemingly didn't miss shots at all. Next is Amphora. She got a slight buff in the 3.0 update, and she seems in a decent place in this tournament, but she should definitely be revisited after the next tournament for potential changes. Top Notch is still fairly balanced, and he just isn't widely used. He seems to be in a position to where if his kit is buffed, then he's going to be a top tier competitor. We know this because back in the early days, many people would complain of his oppressive nature in his AoE attacks. One way to buff him would be to reduce his ult cooldown, even if it is only by 1 second. Next up is Rev, and it seems that FSG was listening when Rev was discussed after the first tournament, at least to an extent. In patch 3.1, she was given damage reduction while in her ult. While this damage reduction is helpful, that isn't the issue at hand here. The impulse she receives is what needs to be reduced. The 40% damage reduction she was given could be changed to 20% and give the other 20% to impulse reduction, and that should help her board slide. Because how can you expect people to play Rev and for Rev to get in people's face when she's constantly being pushed back, even in her movement ability that is supposed to help her get in people's faces? Next is Plink. Poor Plink. Plink seems destined to be at the bottom of these lists, but one thing that may help him is slightly increasing his range or decreasing the spread of his main ability. You have to be careful with this though, because he already has a soft aim lock with his main attack, and coupled with controller aim assist, this could potentially be a scary sight for if this is the action that they take to try to make Plink better. And the final character on our list is Boone. In his current state, Boone will simply never see top tier play because he essentially has no third ability. On the bright side, his recent ult buff was a great one. One suggestion is to give Boone another ability, but that would give Boone an extra ability that no other character has. If you want my personal suggestion, I say that you take away Boone's scatter shot when he's not zoomed in. The idea of giving two different types of a main ability or a main attack is nice, but it honestly holds him back. His aim down sight ability doesn't really help him in the grand scheme of the game because it doesn't help you get away from attacks and it doesn't do damage to anyone. So if you take away his scatter shot and just give him a 100% slug shot, then you can give a new ability in the place of his aim down sights. His slug shot is still going to bounce off walls and floors, and then you just have to figure out what his new ability could be. Congratulations, you made it to the conclusion. Overall, I think the meta is in a better place now more than it was in the first tournament. We see in the numbers that the curve is closer to 50%, so statistically speaking, the game is more balanced. There are talks of another tournament in April, and at the time of recording this video, we don't have a date for that yet, but FSG has stated that it will be a region-based tournament with NA and EU servers separately. So there shouldn't be any major patch or update between now and the next tournament. So I feel like this is going to be our first look at any major shifts in the meta based solely on the players playing in these tournaments. On behalf of both Bolt and Naru, I want to say thank you to those that played in the tournament, those posting the match results in Discord, and we want to thank FSG for making this tournament happen. I also want to personally thank Bolt for bringing me along for this project. I had fun, and I appreciate you letting me help out, man. That's it for this video. Again, leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, leave a comment down below, and let me know your thoughts on the tournament as a whole. Hope you enjoyed. Peace.